Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories. We have stories that should thrill you a little and chill you a little.
It's amazing.
What you'll hear are adventures sent in by you guys, classic stories from the pulp mags, and episodes from the golden age of radio. We have special segments like Ghost Stories with Sylvia.
That's amazing.
And These Are Your Stories. So settle in for the next hour and enjoy the show. One more thing. You just might want to prepare yourself to be taken away from today.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by Grave Deeds and Dead Plots.
Wait, what did you say?
It is the newest book from Sylvia Shults.
Why? Why is that important?
Well, 76.67% of today's show is all about it.
Is that a lot?
It is.
Fountain Randall, good afternoon. Mr. Randall, just a moment, please.
Randall speaking.
Hello, Jim. This is Tony, Mary's brother.
Well, Tony, my boy, how are you?
All fine as silk. Just flew in from Cleveland for the big race at Diamond Track.
Welcome to New York. Where are you now, Tony?
Down at the track. Thought we could drive out to your home tonight and surprise my sister. I haven't seen her in a couple of years.
That's swell. Give me a call when you get back in the city, and we'll drive out together. Mary will be thrilled.
Be sure not to tell her I'm in town. I want to surprise her.
Okay, Tony. See you later. Here we are, Tony.
Hey, your place looks swell, John. You've done a lot of work on it since I was last here.
Yes, Mary and I have worked hard on this property. I can't wait to see Mary's face when she sees you.
Neither can I.
Mary! Hello, Mary! Darling, where are you?
Maybe she went out to the store, or a friend's house.
Well, not Mary. She makes a point of being here when I get home. Or else she tells me where she'll be.
You're a lucky guy.
I'll say. Hello, Mary! I'll appear in the sitting room. Mary! Mary!
Hold it, John. There's nothing we can do. She's dead. John, you've got to pull yourself together. The inspector will be here any minute.
Pour me a drink, will you, Tony? I'll be all right, I guess. I'll go. Inspector?
Yes, Inspector Abbott.
Come in, Mr. Abbott. I'm John Randall. This is my wife's brother, Anthony Marin. Inspector?
How do you do? I'm sorry about your wife, Mr. Randall.
Thanks, Inspector.
I don't want to seem cold-blooded, Mr. Randall, but we may as well begin the investigation.
Well, my wife's in here, Inspector.
Not a pretty sight. One bullet through the left temple. No sign of a struggle. Your wife must have been resting, which gave the murderer a perfect opportunity. I should say she's been dead for at least 3 hours.
Did the end come quickly, Inspector?
Yes, I'm sure she never knew a thing. Where were you, Mr. Randall, this afternoon around 3 o'clock?
At the Midston building where I work. I made one business call over on the east side. Had an appointment at 2:30. I took about an hour.
I see. And you, Mr. Marin?
I flew in from Cleveland this morning. Arrived at about 1:30 and went straight to the Diamond racetrack.
Yes, Inspector. Tony called me from the track shortly before I left the office.
I can't believe that Mary's gone. Who could have wanted to murder her?
I haven't had the time to figure out the reason why, but I know who did the murder.
Inspector Abbott, you mean that...
I mean that Anthony Marin murdered his own sister.
What was the clue that led Inspector Abbott to accuse Tony Marin of murder? In a moment, the inspector will tell you, but first...
Of course, I know the answer to this one.
Oh, really? Enlighten me.
It all has to do with the phone call.
Are you about to say something amazingly smart or decidedly dumb?
It depends.
So then I should expect decidedly dumb.
Maybe. You see, in the 40s, it was illegal to have payphones at the track. They feared that there would be cheaters.
That is dumb.
We'll see.
And now, back to our story.
Mr. Marin became an immediate suspect when he telephoned you, Mr. Randall, from the Diamond racetrack. It is ironic indeed that you had advance knowledge of his mistake. Perhaps murder could have been avoided had you known that at racetracks there are no public telephones.
I told you.
Yes, you did, but it does not change the facts.
And what is that?
You are decidedly dumb regardless of your lucky guess.
Lucky guess?
Okay, how about your overabundance of useless knowledge?
PG, you are one of a kind.
So very true.
What's that you said?
Hello, and welcome to the podcast. On the show today, we are reviewing a brand new book written by our very own Sylvia Shults.
But that would mean...
That's right, Sylvia is here, and we're gonna have ghost stories.
Wow.
I know. She's even agreed to read one of the stories from the book.
Doesn't that sound great?
It does.
What was the name of the book?
Great question. It is titled Grave Deeds and Dead Plots.
That's catchy.
You have no idea. We have another email this week from Andy Forstall of Texas. He writes, "Hey Ron, listen to the show every week. Last week you talked about the show art. Is there a place where we can go view them? Andy." Well, Andy, in fact, there is. I have set up a photo album that anyone can go look at the art from the show, starting with episode number 266 up to the most current. Go to the main website, scroll down just a bit, and you will see a menu item titled "Click here to view the show art." That's it. All it's left is to enjoy it. Now, let's get to the show. Did you know that Ron's Amazing Stories is sponsored by Audible? Audible is home to over 180,000 audiobooks, any of which can be yours. All you have to do is sign up for a 30-day free trial, and Audible will give you a free book and access to their original content. To download your free audiobook, go to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. Thank you, Audible. And now, it's time for your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
Our story for today comes from Mathew Rios, who lives in Sacramento, California. This is Matthew's second story to the show, and he has titled it Ghosts in the Attic. Before I begin, I'll need to give you some context. My parents moved into our current house in 2008. My great-grandparents lived and died there. After they passed, the house stood empty for nearly 20 years before we moved in. We have lived there ever since, and I'm now 17 years old and will graduate next year. Back in 2020, I used to sleep with my bedroom door to the hallway wide open. The kitchen is on the opposite side of the hallway. One day, one of my cats just sat there staring into the kitchen as if there was something there. I thought it was weird, but I didn't think too much of it. Later that night, I woke up to that same cat sleeping beside me. I stared out into the hallway, and I saw this silhouette of a woman in a dress stretching her arms out to me. I was terrified, and I shut and locked the door. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I told my parents what I saw. They both looked at each other, and my mom said, "It was just a dream." But somehow, I knew that there was more. That night, I heard singing coming from the attic. It was a feminine voice. I got brave and went up there. As I got close to the door, the singing abruptly stopped. My dad came up behind me and said, "You heard it too?" I said, "Yeah." That's when he told me that he was sure that my great-grandparents, Lily and Michael, were still there. We still hear singing coming from the attic about every 3 months. Since then, I have made the effort to say hello to Lily and Michael whenever I feel them near. Mathew Rios, Sacramento, California. Well, Matt, I have to say I'm not so sure I would have your courage. Thank you for sharing your story. I look forward to hearing any updates that you might have. Well, that's it for this time. If you have a story that you'd like to share, head to the main website at ronsamazingstories.com. Click on the story submission banner, leave your story, give it a title, and please tell me where you're from. I'll read it if I can. We all love a good story, but what we truly crave is a ghost story. It's time now for Ghost Stories with Sylvia. Sylvia Shults is a librarian and author by day, but at night, she becomes a ghost hunter. Following a lifetime spent in the pursuit of the weird and the strange, her nonfiction works include Ghost of the Illinois River, Fractured Spirits, 44 Years in Darkness, Hunting Demons, and The Spirits of Christmas. We now cross over the veil and join Sylvia as she tells us more tales from the unknown. Sylvia, are you there?
Hey, Ron, come on in.
Thank you. It's good to be here, but it's a little hot outside.
Yes it is. It's beastly everywhere.
Yeah, it is. Well, we're in 92 today. Can you believe it?
I got your beat. I'm at 93.
Oh, well, you know, in the Northwest, 92 is very unpleasant because of the humidity.
True, yeah.
But you know what, Sylvia? I did finally had a few minutes, and I decided I was going to walk around your town a little bit. Mm-hmm. It's really quite nice. But I was really surprised to find a cemetery for alcoholics.
Well, yeah.
And it's haunted by spirits?
You know it. And you know what? By the way, I actually drove to the cemetery the other day, and I kind of freaked out when I got there because my GPS said, "You have reached your final destination."
Well, you know, now that we're on the subject of cemeteries, I heard this story about a girl that ran up to a guy at a cemetery. She says, "I need to pass through this cemetery, but I'm too scared to walk alone. Would you be willing to walk with me?" Well, the guy said, "Oh, yeah, of course. Don't worry. I used to be super scared of cemeteries when I was alive."
Oh, man. Hey, do you know what Dr. Frankenstein calls the cemetery?
No idea.
Human resources.
Oh, Sylvia. Well, you know what? My sister lost her job at the cemetery yesterday.
Oh, no.
Yeah. She buried someone in the wrong hole. It was a grave mistake.
Oh, hey, do you know why the skeleton didn't cross the road?
No idea.
'Cause he didn't have the guts.
You know, I was looking to buy a plot at a cemetery the other day, but at the sale, I just knew it was a scam.
Yeah?
I mean, it was a dead giveaway.
Oh, well. Well, you know what? I've actually been going to the cemetery lately just to practice social distancing.
Oh,
Because, I know that everyone there is going to be 6 feet away.
well, that was fun. But anyway, Sylvia, how are you really?
Really, I am doing pretty darn fine, Ron. I've got a new book out.
I heard.
Just went live last month, and yeah, pretty exciting.
Do you know what I did? I went to this place called Amazon, and I bought the ebook version of that very book.
Ooh.
And I've been reading it, and I got to tell you, I have been having a blast with it. Such great stories. My personal favorite so far.
Yeah.
Do you want to take a guess? Now, there's 30 stories.
Wow, there are a lot to choose from. Oh, man. I'm not even sure what my favorite story is.
Well,
but what's yours?
The Haunted Crossroads from 1805.
That is a good one.
Okay, I'm not going to do any spoilers here on that one. It's one of the longer stories in the book, so I don't want to even go through it. But I'll tell you this. It involves someone being hung from a cage while people onlook.
Yeah, that's a corker, all right. That
man,
was
a great story.
Whew.
That is a great story. Now, I'm going to ask you for a favor today.
What's that?
During the podcast today, will you read one of the stories from the new book for us?
I could be prevailed upon to do just such a thing. Sure.
Well, we'll let you pick the story, but I am looking forward to that.
Me too.
But before we get to that, we have an email today, and it comes from Valerie Sawyer. Normally, when I read emails, they ask us a question.
Yeah.
Well, this one doesn't have any questions. It's just a story.
That's fine too.
But the reason I'm bringing it to you is that it's your kind of story.
Lay it on me.
Well, here's the reason why. It takes place during the Civil War.
Ooh.
And I happen to know.
I'm a sucker for that.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, it comes from Valerie Sawyer, who lives in Jacksonville, Florida. Now, most people don't think of the Civil War when you think of Jacksonville, right?
That's true.
Do you remember a few ghost stories with Sylvia ago where you were talking about the fact that the Civil War, actually parts of it took place in Florida?
I do remember that.
And I was surprised.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out that here's another story that just proves that you really know what you're talking about. There was Civil War activity in Florida.
Right on.
All right.
Yes.
Shall I read this email?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, like I said, this story comes from Valerie Sawyer, who lives in Jacksonville, Florida. She has titled this story, Civil War Ghosts. Hi, Ron. In my family, it seems that only the males have supernatural or spiritual experiences. My dad had several, and I wanted to share one of my favorites that happened to him. When I was a kid, my parents and I camped in state parks all the time. We lived in Florida, so we visited many of the parks here in the state. Many of our campouts were just for the weekend, so the great number of parks within a couple hours of driving distance were perfect for us. One weekend, when I was about 10 years old, in about 1971, we were camping at the Torreya State Park, which is located 50 miles west of Tallahassee. We camped using a large tent, but my dad always enjoyed sleeping outside of the tent in a lounge chair where it was cooler. He was sound asleep this particular evening, and at some point in the middle of the night, he was awakened due to hearing the sounds of horses' hooves and snorts, along with men's voices. He couldn't make out what they were saying, but he could tell conversations were being held. He said his first thought was that he needed to get up and move because if the horses and riders were coming through, they might not see him lying there in the dark, and he was worried about getting trampled. He got up off the lounge chair and began to look around to see if he could see where the sounds were coming from. Gradually, the sounds faded away, and he never saw anything. The next morning, my dad spoke to one of the park rangers and asked him if people generally ride horses late at night in the park, and he related what happened to him. The ranger smiled and told him they get reports like this often. There are never any people on horseback in the park at night. He went on to tell my father that the area where the state park is located was a player in the Civil War, and 6 Confederate gun pits were on the property during the war. Many have conjectured that what people are hearing are ghosts from that area. So I was wrong. She does ask a question, Sylvia.
Oh.
She says, so, did my father have an encounter with spirits from a bygone era on that dark night in the Torreya State Park in northern Florida? I like to believe he did indeed.
Well, yeah.
That is a great story. Thank you for that, Valerie. It's a wonderful story.
Yes, thank you, Valerie, for sharing that with us.
Now, she went on to, I contacted her again, and she went on to say that she is actually a longtime Floridian, 5th generation with grandkids that are 7th generation, that she can actually go back to the Confederacy. The governor of the Florida was one John Milton, and she can trace her lineage all the way back to that gentleman.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. It's not a great story, though. He was pretty distraught when the Confederacy lost, and he ended up committing suicide. So, not so great.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you, Valerie, for sharing that. And now I'm looking forward to see what Sylvia thinks about it.
Yeah, well, Valerie, you are absolutely right. There was a Confederate presence in Florida, of course. And that's actually not the only story of Confederate ghosts that comes out of Florida. I don't know exactly where this was in relation to your state park, but there was the Battle of Olustee, Florida, that was fought on February 20th, 1864. And people have, reenactors have reported hearing sounds, voices of people that aren't there. When reenactors do a battle, of course, some guys fall. They're representing the fellows who fell to hot Union lead. And the reenactors lie there and try to be very still and try to make this as real as possible for the people who are watching the reenactment of the battle. And while lying on the grass during one battle, one reenactor said he just had an eerie feeling while he was lying there, and he kept hearing a voice saying, "Have you seen the elephant?" which is a Civil War era reference for being in combat. So whoever was asking him this saw the guy lying there on the ground and said, well, this must be a fellow soldier. Was that some revenant from the Civil War that happened to find himself in the woods?
Well, you got to look at it from 2 perspectives, right? Because obviously that is not what you just described is not a residual haunting in any way, shape, or form.
So that might have been a time slip, actually.
And so that could have been a time slip, or that could have been an actual ghost, and maybe this person has the ability to see ghosts and didn't know it. But either way, that is definitely not a residual. Whereas Valerie's experience, well, very, very most likely is residual. Especially people are hearing it over and over again and complaining about horses going through the camp in the middle of the night. So, it's interesting. What I love is that there are so many different types of things associated with the Civil War when it comes to the haunted, that it is just fascinating to hear that war made such an impact on so many lives that it is still being felt today. It boggles my mind. And, you hear stories about people are just filled with emotions when they visit a battlefield. And that's not paranormal. That's just energy left behind.
Absolutely.
There's nothing paranormal about that. You can just imagine in your head what people went through during those years. One of the bloodiest conflicts ever. And it's crazy. Maybe World War I was worse. I don't know. But Pretty bad stuff. I'm just constantly amazed by the stories we get from the Civil War. Well, Sylvia, we do have a new book.
We do. Yes, we do.
Why don't you share the title with folks and give us the concept? What are you trying to do with this one?
Okay. Well, the title of this particular collection of stories is called Grave Deeds and Dead Plots. As I was working on Days of the Dead, I realized that so many of the ghost stories I was running across were the result of crimes. So I thought to myself, well, let's stretch our wings a little bit here and let's do a book of true crime with associated hauntings, true crime stories that resulted in a place being haunted. And I've discovered through working on this and through working on other projects that the line between true crime and the paranormal is just vanishingly thin. Because so many of these stories come to us from a great tragedy and the crimes that people can inflict on their fellow human beings. So a lot of that results in hauntings. So eventually I ended up with enough material for, I'm going to say about 5 books. So this is the first in a series.
Yeah, so what's this series? What's this one called? I know it has a subtitle.
No, we dumped the subtitle. We are going with a different titling system. So this is simply Grave Deeds and Dead Plots.
And so you're going to maybe do volume 2 and so forth and so on.
Right, yeah. I believe my title guy told me the other night that he says he has a title for volume 2. It is going to be, and I hope I don't confuse people here, Grave Consequences and Dead Ends.
Oh, I like what you're doing there.
Me too. I said, all right.
Yeah.
I said, okay. And I said, I've got 5 books in the series. And he goes, how do you know I don't have 5 titles? I'm just giving them to you one at a time. And I said, all right, I'll take them one at a time.
So are they all going to be the same format where you kind of give an introduction to what this particular collection is about and then just go into the stories and have them kind of trail after each other?
Yeah. They're all going to be in chronological order. And the only theme that I have going right now is I've collected a whole lot of gangster stories. So one of them is just going to be gangster stories.
Mm-hmm. It's incredible. Well, I'm here to tell you, just as a reader, that this is one of the easiest books that you have written to read. And all your books are great, by the way. But this one is especially tasty, I guess
thank you.
How's that for a good word? Because
that is marvelous. I love it.
Well, a lot of times, for instance, if you take Fractured Souls, it had a different feel to it where you were telling the story of generally the hospital itself. Mm-hmm. This book is, the stories are so independent that you read and then you're done. You know what I mean? Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So you read and then you're done. You don't want to read anymore? Fine. With Fractured Spirits, you just kind of go, I got to read the next one. I got to find out if there's more about this person. And does that boy get out of the basement? And things like that. Whereas this book, you kind of go, okay, I'm done with that. That's creepy, or that's absolutely amazing. I didn't know that Hamilton and Burr were that cursed. Things like that. You just enjoy each individual story, and you can just sit back and reflect on it without having any care of what came before or what went after. And I loved that because it's so refreshing in a book. And I want to tell you, this book would be absolutely perfect for Audible.
Oh.
I mean, just because when do people listen to Audible? In the car when they're going somewhere, right?
Yeah. Or when they're doing dishes or something, doing household chores.
So you've got a 5-minute story, a 10-minute story, whatever it might work out to be. You got 10 minutes? Hey, I got 10 minutes. Hey, I'll listen to one of Sylvia's stories. I mean, this book leads towards that. And I loved it. And I want to thank you for another great book.
Aw, Ron, thank you so much. You are very, very kind.
Well, that, and when I get around to writing the review, I'm going to lock that down and make it sound a lot better. But that's how I feel about this book so far.
Right
now,
on.
I'm going to be honest with you guys. I haven't finished it yet. I am still reading, but I just got it yesterday. So
Right.
You got to give me some that I didn't binge read the whole book. Although I think you probably could, but it would
be possible. I know people who will. I definitely know people who will. Well, you know what, Ron? Since you brought up the idea of having this on Audible and having this available for people to enjoy hearing, how would it be if I read a story right now?
Well, I would think that we would love that.
Okay.
What do you guys think?
All right. Well, it sounds like I ought to pull up a story here. Okay, so I think that people would enjoy a story. Since we were just talking about the Civil War, let's do a story that involves Abraham Lincoln.
I love the guy.
All right.
I would love to have him
me too.
president right now.
Wouldn't that be amazing? Gee whiz, we need more Lincolns in our
That's
lives.
right. Okay, let's get to it. Let's hear.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to guess. Can I guess which one?
Sure.
I'm going to say the story name is Insanity, and it comes from 1855.
You called it, dude. That's right. I used to live in Bloomington, Illinois, so it was a real treat for me to come up with this story and research it, and I actually use it in my Haunted Bloomington Normal presentation when I do that particular talk at libraries and whatnot. All right, so Insanity. The McLean County Historical Society in Bloomington, Illinois was founded in 1892. At first, the aim was simply to do presentations on local history. These papers and transcribed talks were the genesis of its collection. But soon, people in the community started donating things. The outfit turned into the McLean County Museum of History, which opened in 1903. For decades, collection acquisition continued, and the museum was soon stuffed into its digs without the room to properly display its growing collection. In 1992, the museum moved into its present home, the old McLean County Courthouse, built soon after 1900. This was the fourth courthouse built on the square. The first two were built in 1832 and 1836. The third, built in 1868 of limestone and other fireproof materials, at least on the outside, burned from the inside out in the citywide fire of 1900. In 1996, the museum won an Award of Excellence from the Association of Museums for its Evergreen Cemetery Discovery Walk. The museum has also been home to the Cruisin' with Lincoln on 66 Visitors Center since April 2015.
Love that name.
The museum is a grand building that looks every inch a courthouse of importance. The Visitor Center was built in 2014, and before construction began, the museum did an archaeological excavation on the south side of the building. This was the site of the second courthouse, the one in which Abraham Lincoln practiced law. A brass bar set into the pavement now marks the southern wall of that vanished building. The McLean County Museum of History keeps the history of Bloomington alive, and not just with award-winning exhibits and tours. The museum hums with activity and with residual hauntings. Witnesses can sometimes experience burning sensations and sharp chest pains. No one was killed in the 1900 blaze, but a resident running away from the fall of burning cinders suffered a massive heart attack and died. There is also the curious experience of feeling an angry sensation along one's arm, especially when visiting the courtrooms of the building, some of which are preserved as exhibits. To understand this peculiar residual haunting, we have to look again to history. Most of Abraham Lincoln's cases in Bloomington and other towns in the area were property disputes or other minor squabbles. Lincoln's friend Ward Hill Layman, however, had been elected state's attorney, and he got the rare murder cases. One of Layman's first murder cases turned out to be a doozy. At first, it seemed pretty cut and dried, but the further the case progressed, the murkier and more complicated it became. Layman asked Lincoln for help with the prosecution. Here's what happened. Two men, Anson Rusk and Isaac Wyant, didn't get along for whatever reason. In June 1855, Wyant attacked Rusk with a large knife. Rusk, trying to avoid getting cut, drew a pistol and shot Wyant in the arm. The wound was so bad the arm had to be amputated, and Wyant swore he'd get his revenge. In October 1855, Wyant started telling people around town that he was going to take a trip to Indiana. He never left town. Instead, he lay in wait for Rusk. Wyant hung around the town of Clinton for several days, waiting for his chance to attack Rusk. On Friday, October 12th, Rusk came to town, and Wyant started tailing his sworn enemy. He caught up with Rusk at the courthouse. Rusk went into the office of the county clerk and was standing behind the stove with his arms folded. Wyant burst through the door, aimed a revolver at Rusk, and started firing. The first ball hit Rusk in the side, the second in the shoulder, and the third hit his arm. Rusk fell to the floor, writhing in agony, but Wyant wasn't finished. A local newspaper reported with ghoulish thoroughness. Wyant then stood over the fallen man, put the pistol to his head, and fired the fourth shot, the ball passing entirely through the head, and from the orifice it made oozed the brains. Rusk died almost an hour later, never having regained consciousness. Wyant ran from the scene, but was collared only a short distance away from the courthouse. He was clapped into prison and put in chains. The horrified witness, who happened to be in the clerk's office at the time of the murder, was willing to testify. Even worse for Wyant, Rusk's wife was pregnant at the time. The violent death of her husband sent her into labor, and she gave birth prematurely. At the time of the newspaper article, written a week later on October 19th, neither mother nor child was expected to live. The article pointed out, if they die, Wyant will be a triple murderer, and consequently he should suffer the severest penalty of the law. In order to make sure Wyant got a fair trial, there was a change of venue. The trial was moved to the McLean County Courthouse, about 25 miles away from Clinton. The defense attorney was a lawyer named Leonard Swett, who was a good friend of Lincoln's. Swett was an excellent criminal defense attorney, and Layman and Lincoln knew they were in for a fight. Even with the responsible witness testifying that they'd seen Wyant come into the clerk's office and kill Rusk right in front of them, the defense had a reasonable argument. When Wyant's arm was amputated, the doctors doing the surgery used chloroform as an anesthetic. At the time, it was believed that a possible side effect of chloroform use was insanity. Swett's witnesses testified that Wyant's bizarre paranoid behavior only started after the loss of his arm. Since chloroform was used as the anesthetic, Swett argued convincingly that Wyant had become insane as a result. Layman and Lincoln ended up losing the case. Wyant was found to be temporarily insane. He was acquitted of the murders and committed to an insane asylum. The case of the People versus Wyant was one of the earliest cases in American legal history in which an insanity defense resulted in acquittal for the accused. Soon after this trial, Lincoln was asked to take the case of a young man whose only hope was a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. He bowed out of the request and suggested his client ask Leonard Swett to defend him. Yeah, fascinating stuff.
Wow, so cool. And again, we're talking something in history that brings just something we deal with every day. You hear about people pleading insanity, and you wonder, where did it all begin?
Yeah.
Is this the possible birthplace of that? Who knows?
It's possible. The very next story is about America's very first bank robber.
Yeah.
Somebody had to be the first.
I haven't read that one yet, so that is where I'm at. I'm glad you picked Insanity.
Well, thank you for letting me read it. It was super fun.
And Sylvia, thank you for reading it. I think that you get a real good feel as to what this book is and understanding that each of these stories so stand alone that it makes it just a fun read. It really, really does.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I am so looking forward to subsequent books in the series. I've got lots of super great stories to share. And I just can't wait to dive into the next book. And you guys are going to love it. You're going to love this one. You're going to love the next ones. Oh, I'm so excited for you guys.
Well, let me ask you this. Tell us, and I know we've talked about it before, but I think this bears repeating. Tell us how you get these stories. I know the answer already, but you tell us, where in the world do you collect all these great stories?
I keep my eyes and ears open. I do a whole lot of reading. I read voraciously and omnivorously, and I just keep, since starting this project, I just keep an eye open for ghost stories that are the result of violent crime or suicide. Anything that involves true crime is bound to catch my eye these days. And so if it's exciting enough and if it has an interesting enough haunting, I squirrel it away for use in a future book. And boy, I've got some great ones coming up for you guys.
Well, let me ask another question. So we've talked about it before. You are, in fact, a librarian by day. Mm-hmm. And how much of that being a librarian is tied into what you're doing here?
Oh,
100%?
They're so interlaced. I mean, I'm surrounded by books and they pay me to be there. And through the miracle of interlibrary loan, I can read a ghost story book and go to the bibliography at the back and say, oh, that one looks fun. Give me this one too. And I can just command books to show up at my workplace where I am 40 hours a week anyway. And then I say, look, I will take this home and I will read it and I will get ideas and I will share them with people. And it's so exciting to do the job I do and to write the books that I write and share these stories with people. I come across just the most fascinating things and I get to share them.
Yeah.
I love it.
Let me ask another question.
Mm-hmm.
You've been a librarian for a very long time.
25 years this month. That's just at this job.
Yeah. But so you have obviously seen the changes in the library from back when it was just books and nobody had anything like the internet to really go out and, hey, I want to read this book, and you don't have to go to the library to read that book anymore.
True.
How has the library changed from those days to these days? And is it better now or was it better back when?
Oh, it's so much better now. Holy
that wasn't the answer I was expecting. Honestly, that's not it.
I do this for a living, man. And I have been doing this for a living for a very, very long time. I have worked in 3 libraries. I worked as a page shelving books in my hometown library in LaGrange, and I worked at the Bloomington Library. There you go, Bloomington. Worked in the children's department and on their bookmobile for very nearly 5 years. And now I've been at the library in East Peoria for 25 years. So yeah, I remember when I was 16 years old, there was no internet. There was no computerized card catalog. We had to go through the cards and you had to really know what you were looking for. You had to know exactly how to look it up. And if you did, great, you could find something. But if you didn't and you were kind of floundering, you really had no hope of finding anything good unless you went directly to the shelves. And by some lucky happenstance, there was a book that you would find interesting somewhere in that range or on that shelf next to the book you were actually looking for. You could look up a card in a card catalog and maybe it's what you wanted, maybe it's not. And you could flip a couple cards ahead or a couple cards behind on either side of this card, and maybe you'll find something interesting. But now, my goodness, when you type something in, if you type in a title, if you type in a title, say like Practical Demon Keeping, by Christopher Moore. You can find all sorts of titles, and you can look up not only what your library has, but all the libraries in the entire library system. And they'll send it to you. It'll take probably a week. Yeah, and you can just browse around the computer and follow rabbit holes. And while we're on the subject, my goodness, there's the internet. You can look something up like, you can start looking up UFOs, and you can discover something you've never even heard about before, like the Sandown Clown in England in the 1960s. And I had never heard of that, and somebody hit me to it. And, well, you want to know the entire story, hop on the internet and type that in, and boom, you got 50 pages of stuff you can go through.
Can I give you the flip side, though?
Sure.
So this is something I don't think I've ever told you, but in the early 80s, I had the idea that I wanted to try being a writer. And so I joined a writer's club. And the idea was that you write something for every week, you mimeograph it off or photocopy it, as we would call it later on. And you'd bring it enough copies for everybody in the class, and then you'd hand them out, and they'd take them home, and the next week they would review what you wrote. And so I wanted it to be technically correct, what I was writing. I was doing fantasy, but it was with a kind of a science fiction stint to it. And so I went to my local library to look up some scientific facts. And I was getting nowhere. I could get absolutely nowhere. I couldn't figure anything out. I couldn't find anything that was going to help me. So I took a chance, and I walked up to the help desk. Now, at that time, there were at least 4 librarians sitting there waiting for people to come up and ask them questions. That was their job. I walked up there and I said, hey, this is my problem. I'm trying to do this. They bent over backwards to make sure I found what I was looking for. And not only did they find what I was looking for, but I went home with a stack of books on the subject. Now, today's library, when you go, at least here in Vancouver, now it may be different in other places, you have to set up an appointment to talk to the librarian.
What?
Well, yeah, you set up an appointment, and sometimes they can see you right away, or sometimes they can't. But you go there, and then you sit down with them, and then they're just as helpful as the people were back in the 80s, but they sit there and on the keyboard.
Yeah.
And then they say, okay, go to section whatever on the 3rd floor. It's just not the same feel. It is nice, don't get me wrong, and I still respect what they do, and I want you to understand that.
Okay.
They're still skilled to be able to find what I needed, but it's different. It doesn't feel the same of saying, let's walk here and see if we can find it. And then here you are standing with the librarian at the book. It was just, in the 80s, it was different. It had a different feel. Which do I prefer? The 80s.
Well, I guess I'm spoiled, I suppose, because my library is small enough that if you go up to the reference desk, Susie or Katie or anybody will help you find what you need, and they will walk to the shelves with you.
Oh, so it's still the thing to do that.
Yeah.
To help you find what you're looking for.
Melissa or Isaac or Jeremy, anybody will walk you right there.
Now, I want to go a little bit further on this, and I know we're getting long here, but what I have noticed is about these guys, the librarians there, is that they turned me on to some things that I wouldn't even have thought of. I was working for someone, and I had to find books that were similar to The Princess Bride, because the client that I was working with at the time, he wanted to write a book in the style of The Princess Bride. And so I wanted to show him other examples other than The Princess Bride so that he could see some other techniques, because he wasn't getting The Princess Bride down at all. I wanted him to see some other techniques, so I wanted to find other authors. And so immediately this librarian that I worked with, and I don't remember her name, I'm very sorry, she sat down and said, well, you know what you want is you want to look at this gentleman and this gentleman and this. So she had the same smarts, did the same things, but suggested books as opposed to taking me and saying, well, let's look at this one.
Ah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
And I think the internet today has depersonalized the librarian client experience.
I see.
It may be that my library here in town, the one I go to, has 5 floors.
Oof.
And every floor has a different purpose. So for her to say, well, let's go up to the 5th floor and look and see if we can find that book. That's just happens to be where on the 5th floor is where all the ghost stories and stuff are.
Ah, okay.
But I could see, she's on the 1st floor down, where all the offices and stuff are. And for her to say, oh yeah, let's get on the elevator or take the stairs and go up 5 flights of stairs to the 5th floor.
I can understand that. Yeah. We've got 2 floors, and adult services is all on 1 floor, so it's much easier for us to do that. Like across the river in Peoria Library, it would be a much different story. I think they've got 4 or 5 floors. And yeah, some of the art books are on their own floor, and fiction is on its own floor. And yeah, it would be much more difficult to do that.
Health studies, children's books. Yeah, they're all on different floors. So I guess I wanted to say that so that you didn't think I was bad-mouthing our librarians here.
Okay.
They have a different challenge.
Right.
Now, I don't know. That is so far off the subject, and I apologize to all of you that I did it again. I am so sorry. And we are actually out of time. But Sylvia, tell us where you can get this wonderful book. And I know it's not in the library just yet.
Okay, well, right, yeah, my copy that I donated to our library is still sitting on the processing shelf, so it's not in my library yet either. Yeah, you can find it on Amazon, of course, and I also always like pointing people towards bookshop.org. That is an outfit that has tons and tons and tons of books, but when you buy a book from bookshop.org, part of the proceeds from the book goes to support independent bookstores. So that is something that I really like to support.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so let's really move on here. And so what do we got cooking in the world of Sylvia Shults right now?
Well, I've got a couple of convention appearances lined up, and I'll be having fun with those and still telling people about the new book, Grave Deeds and Dead Plots, and just having a whole lot of fun and doing radio interviews and talking with you and just generally enjoying the summer.
Well, I'm looking at the current lights out for your podcast, and you are on number 103, the Pennhurst Asylum.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, I got to visit Pennhurst, a couple years ago, and we combined that with the Gettysburg trip that year. It was Dale Kazmarek's Ghost Research Society and a bunch of other people, and we all went to Gettysburg, but before we went to Gettysburg, we went about an hour past Gettysburg and visited Pennhurst Asylum, and that was somewhere I'd wanted to visit for a very long time. You guys all know my soft spot for asylums and mental hospitals, but this was one of the bad ones.
Oh, I was going to say, this is not this is not your roses and honeysuckles type of asylum. This one was when the places where they did multiple head traumas type brain surgeries and things like that.
Yeah, and locking children to beds and things like that. It's just really, truly an awful place. So I wanted to get that experience too. I wanted to go through that atmosphere, and it was quite an eye-opener.
Yeah, I've seen many a ghost hunter has done a show from Pennhurst Asylum, so.
Yeah. We were there during the day, but it was a gloomy, rainy day, so it was very atmospheric and, fascinating place. So I didn't get to experience it after dark, but, oh boy, seeing it on a gloomy, rainy day it gave you the feel for the place, that's for sure.
And what do we got coming on Lights Out?
Ooh, boy, the next Lights Out is going to be a trip to an abandoned cemetery in the middle of the Illinois woods, and I can't even tell you where it is. It's secret So I won't actually tell people where it is, but boy, oh boy, the spirits are active at that place.
Wow.
The entire thing is like a Where's Waldo of EVPs. And you're just going to hear voice after voice after voice as we're recording. It's amazing.
And when's that one due out?
Oh, as soon as I can.
Okay.
I'll hope to get it. I'll hope to get it out by early August or mid-August or so. Librarian by day, ghost hunter by night. Author when those two things aren't taking up her time. All right, Sylvia. Well, again, we've had a wonderful conversation, and I do apologize for the bad dad jokes at the beginning of the show. And who knows, we may do that again, though. I thought that was kind of fun. Yeah.
All right, Sylvia. Well, I want to thank you for your time, and thank you for being here once again, and thank you for the new book, which is titled
Grave Deeds and Dead Plots,
which you can find on your favorite Amazon or
bookshop.org.
All right. Well, Sylvia, thank you again, and good night to everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Ghost Stories with Sylvia was brought to you by Gladys Goodies. I always have a great time talking with Sylvia, and I learn all kinds of new stuff. If you want to visit her on her home turf, head to sylviaschultz.wordpress.com. There you will find her blog and access to the podcast Lights Out. I will have links available in the show notes. Thank you, Sylvia. Gladys Goodies treats are a 100% natural, nutrient-rich treat that pets love to eat. You can get your treats and some really cool swag for your dog and cat at GladysGoodies.com. And don't forget to use our very own promo code RONS. That's RONS. And you'll get a 20% discount on all of your purchases. That website again is GladysGoodies.com. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Ghost Stories with Sylvia.
Not so many years ago, tomato soup and cream of tomato were unusual dishes, enjoyed very much, but not very often. Today, of all the soups in the world, tomato soup is the one most often served. Not because women have taken to making tomato soup frequently. No, on the contrary, few housewives ever attempt it anymore. There's just one reason for tomato soup's popularity, and it is this: the magic, matchless flavor of Campbell's tomato soup. There's a lively verve, a dashing zest about this flavor that people take to at once and come back to and enjoy again and again. The first racy taste of it has a way of arousing a desire to eat, and yet there's a pleasant feeling of satisfaction when the last spoonful is gone. So this soup is a happy choice for the main dish at lunchtime or at supper, and it also is a fine way to start the day's main meal. Serve it sometimes, too, as cream of tomato, made with milk instead of water. You can always be sure that it will be received with pleasure, because this, of all soups, is the one people like to have most often: Campbell's tomato soup.
That was episode number 554, and I want to thank Sylvia. If you want to read Grave Deeds and Dead Plots, you can find it on Amazon or bookshop.org. You are gonna love it. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find any of the links I mentioned and how to contact us. Do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it, and please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. Clicking that follow or like button makes us grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.